Good evening and welcome to Q&A. We're live at the Joan Sutherland Performing Arts Centre in Penrith, here in the politically contested outer west of Sydney. I'm Tony Jones, and answering your questions tonight, the opposition leader, Bill Shorten. Please welcome our special guest. Thank you. Now, last year, Bill Shorten was written off as a man who'd never make it, but now, with the election in sight, he is a genuine contender. Tonight, the voters get their chance to question and test the man who wants to lead our nation. As usual, you can watch Q&A live on ABC TV in the East, News 24 in the Centre and the West, and you can listen on News Radio right across Australia. We're also streaming Q&A live via Facebook, so go to our Facebook page to watch that, comment, or ask a question. Our first question is in the audience, comes here in the Joan. It comes from Colin Edmondson.
Good evening. Both Labor and the Coalition have been constantly and possibly annoyingly on message over the past few weeks with either jobs and growth or we have a positive plan for whatever the topic may be. I want to ask you, have there ever been times when you have desperately wanted to abandon this mantra and speak openly to the Australian people in maybe a less scripted way? And is tonight one of those great opportunities for you?
Shorten.
Thanks, Colin. That's a great question. And let me then try a bit of going off script. This is a great show, Q&A. It's a great chance to take people's questions. But right around the world, including Australia, there'll be a lot of people who will be incredibly upset by what happened in Orlando. What happened in Orlando was an act of terror, an act of evil, an act of fear. But also, it particularly targeted a gay club, a gay nightclub. So I particularly today want to, as I did this morning, but again tonight, just acknowledge that the particular and pain and upset which members of the Australian LGBTI community might be feeling, will be feeling in fact. This wasn't just an attack on our humanity. This was an attack on our right to be proud of who we are, our right to choose who we love. So in this election, there are things which are much more important, dare I say it, than the big battles we're having, and this is one of those times. And Colin, when you talk about going off script, there's plenty of issues in this election beyond the headline issues, which I think do need to be spoken about. So some of the moments, amongst others, that I've particularly enjoyed, other than just meeting people, is promoting the equal treatment of women in our society. We launched our women's policy last Saturday, talking about our arts policy, the Creative Australia, calling out the existence of systemic racism still in our society. If you are a leader, you have an incredibly privileged position in the time of a federal election to talk about things that really matter, to outline your vision, but you also get a chance to talk about issues which perhaps in the daily 24-hour news cycle don't get covered. So I think that, we didn't want an 8-week election, but having had that put upon us, I view this election as a chance to have a really decent conversation with Australia, not just about jobs and education and Medicare, but about a whole lot of power issues, issues of fairness, issues of where this country's going, Colin. So thank you again.
All right, well, let's go to our first political question, seriously political question. It's from Jason Atkinson.
Chris Bowen last week said that Labor would run bigger budget deficits than the current government, but reach surplus at the same time. I just want to know how a Shorten government would spend more yet save more at the same time.
Well, Chris, also, thank you. Sorry, I missed your first name. Jason. Thank you, Jason. What Chris said is that we will get to balance in the same year, and that means we will improve the budget bottom line. What he also said, which hasn't been reported, is that we will, in the next 3 years, keep reducing the deficit each year. But what we won't do is promise Australians that we can reduce the deficit by the use of zombie cuts, that is, measures which are never going to get through the Senate. The government's relying upon measures which they know won't get through the Senate to dodgy up their numbers in the next 3 years and say, see, aren't we champions? The other thing which they're proposing to do is rely upon improving their budget bottom line position by introducing retrospective measures which punish people for changes and decisions they made with their finances, relying on existing laws and the government's
Okay, I'm going to
back.
bring you back to the question, if you don't mind, and I'm going to bring you to the central point, which is that you are going to have larger deficits than the government over the next 4 years. Are you prepared to admit that and to actually say the words?
Well, I'm actually answering the question, but what I'm not going to do is
We're
do
going
it
to
in-
answer questions from
Tony,
the floor and follow-up
Yeah,
questions
I'm
from
gonna
me.
answer-
That's how it's going to be.
I'm going to answer Jason's questions. But what I'm not going to do is play gotcha politics. I'm explaining what Chris Bowen has said. This gentleman...
Can I just I'll make a point then, because what Chris Bowen said and what you've said when referring to these deficits is we're not going to have the same degree of fiscal contraction as the government. I mean, I guess going back to the first question of being straight and being not talking points here, can you simply admit that these are 4 years of increasing deficits, deficits that are bigger than the government's deficits? Can you admit that?
Each year, if we get elected on July the 2nd, we will reduce the deficit. We will not reduce the deficit as fast as the government in the first 3 years because they're relying on cuts which are just fake and bogus. That's a straight answer. After the 4th year, we will reduce the deficit further and better and start paying down government debt. But what I won't do is pretend to Australians that we don't have that you can just make cuts which you know will never pass the Senate. That would be dishonest, and that's what the government's doing. That's a straight answer.
I'm just going to go back to our questioner, Jason. Are you happy with the answer that you've just heard?
Well, how are you going to make the savings? How are you going to make the cuts and the savings? You talk about what the coalition are doing that won't get through to Senate. What are your unpopular cuts that you would do?
Well, great question, and I'm happy to go to a range of them. First of all, we will make multinationals pay their fair share of taxation. Secondly, we are going to increase the tobacco excise. Thirdly, we're not going to pass on the tax cut that Mr Turnbull's giving in the budget to people who are in the highest tax bracket. Fourthly, we are going to rein in negative gearing and capital gains tax concessions because we don't think that they're sustainable in the long run. And most of all, we are not going to give a $50 billion tax cut to large corporations, which isn't going to generate jobs in Australia, and instead that will wreck the budget. Our measures that we've proposed go into tens and tens of billions of dollars of improvements to the budget bottom line, not just in 1 year, but every year over the next 10 years. What we will do is also reduce our unaffordable government spending. We've made the hard decision to rein in some of the family tax benefit payments for people who are receiving supplements who earn over $100,000 a year. So we will make hard decisions, and that is the way we will get to surplus. Our opposition that I lead has rejected the small target strategy, which is the sort of political wisdom for the last 2 and 3 decades. We've been outlining those policies, some of which I've just outlined then, for the last 12 months. We won't have unsustainable superannuation tax concessions at the top end, which mean that the taxpayer of Australia is subsidising some lucky people who have millions of dollars already in their superannuation and paying no tax at all on the retirement income earnings when you already have millions of dollars. We do have a very clear plan and we'll stick to it.
Okay, when are we going to see the costings of your policies and exactly how big those deficits are projected to be over the next 4 years?
When we've finished rolling out our policies in the next week or so, after that, well before the election, we will outline our costings, full stop. Remember, Tony Abbott
So we won't know until then how big each deficit is going to be in each of those 4 years?
Well, we will outline and release our costings well in advance of when the Liberals did it in the 2013 election. They did it on the Thursday night before the election, when there's already a moratorium on electronic advertising on television. I give you this undertaking, we will outline our costings well before Mr Abbott and the Liberals did in the last election.
Can you give us an exact date now?
We haven't finalised the date, but we will do it well before.
All right, let's go to our next question. It's from David Strutt.
Thank you, Tony and Bill. In times of prosperity, we may be able to afford government generosity, but we're not in times of prosperity. I think probably unfortunately when we were in the height of the mining boom, we got some tax cuts and various tax benefits, but now you've got Gonski, you've got NBN, you've got NDIS, and they were devised by flawed, fallacious, unfounded and false justifications. And they are now the Gillard landmines that we're wading through on the process to recovery. Leaders of today's political parties are terrified by retaliations from social media and from vociferous minorities. So are you prepared to make the unpopular decisions necessary to lead us back to prosperity?
Yes, David, I am, but I don't agree with the way you've characterised improving funding to schools or the National Disability Insurance Scheme. But let me go to the... I can promise now that a government I lead will ensure that we introduce policies that means that we will save more than we spend. We will do that. That is our commitment. But what I'm not prepared to do is sacrifice properly funding our schools or the National Disability Insurance Scheme. I've just got here a very quick list of some of the decisions we're making, which we will have some. These are spending reductions.
It looks like a long list to me.
Well, there's a lot of things we're making tough decisions
then
on.
you're going to be very quick. Just pick the top ones.
Well, I'm going to be factual. We've agreed that we will, in terms of spending, remove, and this will cause us some grief, understand this, the subsidy currently received for natural therapies under private health insurance. We have said that we will remove or decrease the research and development tax incentive. There'll be people who complain about that. If you want to see how we get attacked for making hard decisions, some of the senior leaders of the property industry are preparing to campaign against us because we don't want to give a tax subsidy for people who already own 10 houses to buy their 11th investment property. We're prepared to have an argument, not that I wish to, with the Business Council of Australia, who's going to run television ads so they can defend their ability to get a $50 billion tax cut. I just wish the BCA had run some ads one day about protecting Medicare or making sure that kids in schools get the same resources regardless of where they live or what their parents own.
Just, the questioner wants to come back in, Bill Shorten, so I'll let him come back. Yes,
Sure.
Go ahead. Just jump up, thank you.
Yeah, you can only spend $1 once. So I don't see how you can make promises to spend money and you're making promises to save money. I'm not seeing my way clear. I need to see that funding, but at the moment it's just words, and I don't think it's actually, I think they're hollow.
Well, okay, that's your opinion, you're entitled to it, but what I'll say to you back is this. Money spent on making sure children have got the best resources in schools is an investment for the future. Money spent on the National Disability Insurance Scheme is much more efficient than the current broken system, where crisis is the only way that resources get allocated. This debate about spending has to be seen in the context of what this election's about. It's about choices. I choose to use scarce taxpayer dollars and find the money through hard decisions to help save Medicare, to properly fund our schools, and to make sure we can back in our kids going to university. Mr Turnbull chooses to make his economic plan giving away $50 billion to large corporations. I just think my plan's a better plan for the future of Australia. It's as simple as that.
Very briefly, your social policies. Your social policies are more significant to you than reaching a surplus quickly. Is that what you're saying?
No. When you talk about social policies, I don't see funding education just as a social policy. It's an economic strategy. You cannot be an innovation nation unless you're an education nation.
Okay, let's go to our next question. A lot of people are interested in costings of your big promises. Here's another one from Jacob Hendricks.
Mr Shorten, this morning you announced a new NBN plan, which promises to increase the scope and the quality of what's already been executed by the Turnbull government. My question for you is, where do you expect to source the funding to be able to support that?
From the same place that Malcolm Turnbull is. And the fact of the matter is that I believe when it comes to NBN, the current government's chosen the wrong technology. Their over-reliance upon copper will mean that the operational expenditure of this item, this technology, over forthcoming years will be more expensive than if we had a greater proportion of fibre in our NBN. So we believe do it once, do it properly, do it right. That's why we've said that we want to see more fibre in our proposition for the NBN Co going forward. Now, we can't go back to everything that Labor said they'd do last time because, frankly, that train has left the station. So I'm not here saying that you have to rip up everything that the Liberals have done. That's stupid. That really annoys people when one side of politics pretends the other side of politics is all wrong and all bad and everything they've done should be just put in the bin. I don't believe that. But what I do believe is that long-term, putting fibre into our broadband will actually be cheaper to maintain and generate a better return for the NBN Co over coming years.
Okay, where is the money going to come from? It's not a magic pudding, the NBN rollout money. You can't just keep doing extra things on top of what is already being done, but for the same price. And this seems to be what you're promising.
Well, we are saying that we can do it for the same price. And it's this, imagine 3 ingredients in terms of the cost. There's your capital expenditure. That's laying it out. Then there's your operational expenditure. That's maintaining your system. And then there's the internal rate of return, which you get from more people buying into the service. I recognise that if you spend more on the capital expenditure by getting the best quality technology in the offering, that what that delivers is a twofold benefit. One, the system will be cheaper to maintain over the longer term. And 2, because you can get a better NBN, a more reliable NBN, an NBN which is much less prone to buffering, more people are happy to buy into the service. So the beauty of Labor's proposition is that we know that fiber's going down in cost compared to copper. We know that fiber's going down.
Well, the government's disputing the claim that the rollout of fibre is getting cheaper. They're saying you have no evidence to support that, and that the NBN management and the board of the NBN will not support that argument.
Well, there's a surprise. The Liberals are opposing our idea. Well, like, I'm not...
No, they're actually opposing... they're opposing your costings, because you're saying you can do it without spending any more money.
This government...
Can I just go a quick one?
Do I take that as a comment or a question?
This is a question. If you're going to put fibre to the house, to 2 million extra houses, how can you do that without paying extra money?
Well, as I've said, it will involve greater capital expenditure, full stop. I've said that. But what I also say is that if you've got better technology, the operational costs are less, and if it's a better deal, more people will buy into it, improving the return overall. And let's also go through costs and how this is performing. It wasn't a Labor government who's tried to cover up the NBN data with all their, their complaints about whistleblowers and police raids. If this is such a good deal, why is the government so keen to hide it?
Okay, so 2 million extra houses will cost more. How much more?
Well, in CapEx terms, about 3.4 billion. So, and in terms of operational expense, less than what they're doing it. Let me use this analogy for people who aren't necessarily devotees of the debate of copper technology or fibre. Let me use this analogy. Don't you sometimes, when you're driving on a freeway, slap your hand on your forehead when you see them building a new single-lane off-ramp, which you know will be obsolete before it's open? The more copper technology we put into our system, the more likely it is that we'll be back digging it up and replacing it, because it's not the best technology. Australians should have, when we have a national broadband network, the best technology available. And the way we do it in the same envelope is we're not debating everything that Malcolm Turnbull's done. We might have done things differently, but we're not going to go and dig up all the fibre to the node that they've already built, and we're not going to disagree with the use of high-frequency cable and using some of the networks which are already out there for people to plug into.
Let's move on. We've got questions on all sorts of subjects, including education. This question's from Tessa Hitchens.
I live and go to school in Sydney's outer western suburbs, and I'm in Year 10. Here we certainly have our fair share of talented young people who will be even more amazing with a quality university education. Our country's future depends on our talent being fully tapped. My friends and I want to be a big part of Australia's success, and we're willing to put in the work. But we're worried about university fees. Can you assure us that university will be more accessible and be more affordable than it is now, and will not require young people to mortgage it themselves to keep this country going?
Bill Shorten.
Yes, I can. I can also prove I can answer a question quickly. But the reason why I say yes, I can, is because Labor's made a decision. It's this priorities issue. We do not support the whole-scale deregulation of university fees, and we do not support the 20% cut in funding to higher education that we've seen this government push for the last 2.5 years. We think that investing in downward pressure on university fees is actually an investment in the future. We had that debate earlier on, I think, with David, where there was a debate about education funding and is it a cost and how do you pay for it. Our nation needs to actually spend more on universities, not less. Now, of course, we want to make sure that students are getting quality. In other words, it's not just given to the universities and then they become factories where they churn people for enrolment and we don't see good outcomes and quality teaching. But what we're prepared to do is not only provide a minimum student funding guarantee of $10,800 per student. Not only are we prepared to guarantee that we won't support the whole-scale deregulation of university fees, but what we're also prepared to do is support 100,000 students in the next 5 years, so 20,000 a year, who wish to enrol in STEM courses, science, technology, engineering and mathematics. Half of those 100,000 would be women. What we want to do is actually, if they successfully complete those degrees, make them HECS debt-free.
Just a quick follow-up. Would you even consider putting a cap on the cost of any university degree?
Well, we certainly, by our actions, have opposed the phenomena of the $100,000 degrees, which would be the inevitable consequence of liberal higher education policy.
But would you put a cap on the cost of degrees?
Sorry, I'm taking too long. But what I am saying here is we would put downward pressure by providing a minimum guarantee of funding to every university, and by not creating a race to the bottom in terms of the deregulation of university fee courses. I believe that you have a de facto cap, but I can't speak for each course and the technology involved in each course. That would be, I think, a bridge too far. But what I can say is that we've made the hard decisions to clear funding in our budget by not doing other things so that we can turbocharge people going to university. For me, it's as basic as this. It shouldn't be how rich your parents are, which determines your ability to get a higher education. It should be how hard you work. It's as simple as that.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Gina Field.
Thank you, Tony. Hi, Bill.
Hi.
I just want to switch over to your thinking to business and just remind the government that we are the engine room of the Australian economy and we are the backbone.
I think he's not the government yet. You're probably talking about the opposition.
If you are elected, so we're just, I'm just getting you a bit of
You're getting an early. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
As a small business owner and also the president of the Penrith Valley Chamber of Commerce, it is extremely refreshing to see that the Coalition has backed a plan to support small business because we employ nearly 5 million Australians. Their plan includes a number of incentives to assist small business. So, Mr Shorten, my question is to you, what plan does the Labor Party have, if you are elected of course, to make it easier for small business to grow? Are you prepared to match or better the 10-year enterprise tax plan of the Coalition?
Okay. Stay with us, Gina. We might come back to you, but let's hear from Bill Shorten.
Well, you've asked about the 10-year enterprise plan that the government's put up, which would see a reduction in the corporate tax rates paid by Australian corporations. No, we're not prepared to match their 10-year plan. Now, I'd love to be in a position where I could make everyone happy, but I also know that that's not leadership. We are prepared to support a reduction in the tax rates for companies whose turnover is less than $2 million. Absolutely. We think they are well within the category of small businesses. So that's 83% of all corporations, by the way. But when we look at the rest of it, we don't think it is possible, and we're also happy with to help those companies with instant asset write-off, and there is complete bipartisanship. But when we look at the extension of big tax reductions for the rest of the companies stretching up to $1 billion, well, we don't think the case is made out to do it at this time. We don't believe that we can afford to do it. And Australia's economy has been transitioning since the mining boom. Small business is really important. Don't get me wrong, and you're right, it is an engine room in terms of jobs. But when I look at the competing choices, I offer myself for the highest political position in Australia, the Prime Minister. I've got to make choices. I know the economy is transitioning, and I think confidence has been flatlining. Real wages growth is flatlining. Living standards are actually falling in this country. So then what I've got to look at is what is the best way to help relieve that pressure. Now, I support for businesses under 2 million, no problems. But when I look at the alternatives, if we take $50 billion in tax cuts, which is what it is for businesses above $2 million over the next 10 years, and by the way, the vast bulk of that $50 billion is probably for companies of a size which are not members of your Chamber of Commerce, that puts a burden on everyone else. See, I'm not prepared to sacrifice bulk billing. I'm not prepared to sacrifice properly funding our schools. And if we want to make a transition, in a changing world, then what we've got to do is make sure we've got a skilled workforce.
Okay,
We've got to make sure that we have proper infrastructure.
I'm going to interrupt you just so that we can go back to our questioner. Sure. Now, the core here is that Labor is defining a small business as under $2 million. How do you define small business?
I actually think that you're stereotyping small business, because you can have a husband and wife company that turns over more than $2 million. So, and also from my experience, we're actually reaching a turnover. I'm not saying this is every business. I'm saying that small business is actually reaching a turnover of over $2 million a lot quicker. And now I can actually state that your vision will not help me, because I actually turn over more than $2 million.
Okay, so, we'll take that straight back to the opposition leader. Go ahead.
As I said to you at the start of my answer, I'd like to tell you what you want to hear, but that's not leadership. And I tell you what I also think helps a community, so that people have got money in their pocket so they can shop in the shops in this area. It's having a job, it's having good infrastructure, it's having an NBN which is delivering for small business. It's making sure that your workforce is healthy and not discouraged from going to the doctor because of the price of going to see the doctor. It's having an educated workforce in the future. I assume, I don't doubt, Mr Turnbull wants a better Australia, so do I. We just disagree on the best way to get there. And now is not the time to pass a $50 billion tax cut, most of which won't go to the members of your chamber. $7.4 billion of that will go to the 4 big banks.
Okay, we've got a question coming up on that, so I'll pause you there.
So,
but just a quick follow-up on that. Are you prepared even to listen to arguments that your definition of small business is wrong, that businesses over 2 million, maybe in a different range, are also small?
I am more than prepared to listen to the debate and the experiences of business people. I've been doing that my whole life. 83% of companies are currently less than 2 million. Until this budget, everyone said a small business was 2 million or less. Abbott and Hockey and Mr Turnbull voted for that in the last 2 budgets. That was the acceptable definition.
But are you prepared to accept that your definition may be wrong and you might have to change it?
I'm never so inflexible that I won't listen to change and to arguments of change. But I tell you one favour I can do small business and even bigger business and really big business is I'll keep opposing a 15% GST, because that won't help any business.
All right, let's go to our next question. Also on this topic, Alex Getley.
Evening, gents. Mr Shorten, one of the common issues you've raised against the Prime Minister and just now is the $7.4 billion tax handout he's giving to the 4 banks. I would like to know why you're so against supporting these banks, who are said to be the pillars of Australia's economy, and what you would do with the money instead. It seems to me that the best place for this money to go would be places where it is used to support the financial success of individuals, families and other businesses in Australia, not to mention that some of these banks are also at the forefront of issues like sustainability and social change.
Bill Shorten.
I'm not against banks. I just don't think they need a $7.4 billion budget transfer to their bottom line to make more profit. This is what
I've got to ask you this.
Sorry, I'll just go a little. Like, Mr Turnbull and I had a debate on another TV channel. He said, oh, there's Mr Shorten, he wants to put banks in the dock. No, I don't. But I do think that they should have a royal commission into the banking sector, because I actually think that I don't think it is right what we keep hearing. Now, I haven't always been a fan of that. But how many financial scandals does it take? How many ASIC investigations does it take? How many tens of thousands of people being ripped off does it take before we reject the notion that to have a strong banking sector, you don't need to have an ethical banking sector? I think to make banks stronger and better in the future, the transparency of a royal commission will enhance the conduct in our banking sector. It won't diminish it. And there's a general argument which goes on here which says, well, what else would you spend that money on? Well, I'd unfreeze the rebates going to GPs, so GPs don't have to charge upfront fees to go and see the doctor. I'd make sure that we could scrap the price hike which Mr Turnbull and the Liberals are going to give to the cost of prescription medicine in this country, and I would actually pay down net debt in this country. I'd pay down government debt. So it's not a question of being, unless you give the banks a $7.4 billion tax cut, you're anti-banks. I'll work with banks. I have my whole working life. I just won't work for them.
Okay, remember, if you hear any doubtful claims on Q&A tonight, send a tweet using the hashtags FactCheck and Quanda, and keep an eye on our Twitter account for the verdicts. Now, the next question comes from Damien Damianowski.
Thanks, Tony. Mr. Shorten, I'm 31 years old and I've done all the things that were asked of me. I went to a public school. I started working at 14 years and 9 months old. I earned money. I paid my taxes. I never took a single cent in government funding in any way, shape or form. I went on. I started a business. I employed 20 people. My question's this. Why is it that neither yourself nor the other side seem to hear one of the biggest concerns at the moment, which is it has become impossible for people of my age to afford a house in the city we live in? And what are you going to do about it?
Stay with us.
We want to create a level playing field for people who are buying their first home with investors who are subsidised by taxpayer-funded subsidies. Now, the issue of housing prices isn't just about negative gearing, okay? Let's be clear. Land supply plays a factor. Whether or not you have a job plays a factor. The presence of overseas buyers plays a factor. So
you're saying capital gains tax plays a factor as well? Well,
negative gearing and capital gains tax discount concessions do play a factor too. So we're looking at one of the strands of reform. Currently, this nation, if you look at the negative gearing, is where you get a subsidy, for the cost of your interest payments, and you can offset that against other income. Now, if you have enough money to take advantage of this perfectly legal practice, that's fine. But the problem is that I don't believe as a nation we should be subsidising that form of activity over other choices, reducing government debt, the other measures which I think build a stronger economy and a stronger society. The beauty of what we're proposing is, one, it's not retrospective. So for anyone in this audience and anyone watching tonight, if you currently negatively gear, there is no change, because we don't believe in making radical change and retrospective change in negative gearing and capital gains tax discount. But two, you'll still be able to do it for new housing. And three, it will no longer be available after the 1st of July 2017 for existing housing. And what that means is that when you're bidding for a house, Mr. Turnbull loves to say there'll be less bidders. There might be a couple of less bidders, but the point about it is there'll still be competition for housing prices. It's not going to ruin the housing market. What it'll do is reduce the heat in an overheated housing market.
Okay, I'm just going to quickly go to another question on this topic. It's from a different perspective. It's from Sean Seacole.
Okay, so my question to you, well, I'll just give you a bit of background first. We all know that the pension...
Sean.
Brief background, yep. We all know that the pension isn't going to be very much. In terms of negative gearing, I'm not referring to the people that you've mentioned, like mentioned by yourself, have, an abundance of wealth, etc., and tens of investment properties here and there. I'm talking about the people sort of in the suburbs here who have invested for their future because, they're not going to get superannuation by virtue of reasons beyond their control, such as people who have been, like wives who have been widowed by their husbands, etc., who've just taken advantage of, being able to buy maybe a small investment or something and then sell that for their retirement. So for the people who are going to get possibly 100 grand or less superannuation when they retire, I think that would be quite sad to get rid of negative gearing, because that's kind of the only livelihood for a lot of these kinds of people. So
okay, well, I think you've made your point. I'll take it straight to Bill. Sure, there are a lot of people out there worried about this, because it's not just rich people, it's not just the top end who are using negative gearing.
And I've used my words carefully. I use the word investor. It's not illegal. It's perfectly legal. I don't judge it. What I go to, though, is the following things. You will still be able to negatively gear if we get elected, except for new housing, not existing housing. So if you want that form of investment, it's still there for you for your retirement. Secondly, if you've currently invested under the current rules, no change. So there are actually no losers. It's a prospective change. But thirdly, I've got to say...
Can I just make one point? The government disagrees with you there. It says if you buy a new house, as soon as you put the key in the door, it becomes a second-hand house. Therefore, investors can't buy those houses, so they're going to lose money immediately.
It's usual government propaganda. Let's be brutal.
That's their argument, though.
No, I know, I get that. I mean, I'll try and answer your point and Sean's.
Sure.
So you can still do it. So that's good. That meets one of your criteria. If you currently do it, that's fine. That meets another criteria. But I've got a couple of other criteria which I think are also important here. You can still invest in housing, you just can't get a tax deduction for it. Property's still a good buy. Like, somehow you'd think if you listen to Mr Turnbull and the sort of half-hearted scare campaign they've been running so far, you'd think you're not allowed to invest in property anymore. Can I tell you, property's still going to be valuable. All I'm saying is that every taxpayer who goes to work and pays taxes will no longer be required to subsidise those people who seek to claim a tax deduction from negative gearing for the housing. This is not the end of the world.
So would you hope, in fact, that... I'll go back to our question there. We'll get a microphone down to you, Damien. But would you hope, to pick up Damien's point earlier, that price of housing would actually go down so that people like Damien could afford to buy one?
Yeah.
Is that what you would hope would happen?
Tony, let me answer it. I believe that our policies will mean that housing prices won't grow so fast. But I don't believe that this is going to affect, in a downward way, the price of houses. What affects housing prices is if you live in a mining town in central Queensland and the mining boom's over. What affects your ability to service a mortgage is the loss of the job or a family breakup. You know, the truth of the matter is there are a range of factors which generate house pricing, the pricing of houses. I just think that we've got to make some hard choices. For 30 years, political parties on both sides have been told, if you touch negative gearing in any fashion at all, you'll be out on your ear because the property industry will stop it. I do not begrudge the property industry and the high end of those people trying to form campaign funds to campaign against us. They're hanging on to a taxpayer subsidy that every one of you who went to work today is contributing to. But what I don't believe is right is that this nation, when you look at what we give in the form of tax concession, tax subsidy on negative gearing and capital gains tax discount, is spending more at the Commonwealth level on negative gearing and CGT discount than we are on childcare or higher education. What priority is that?
OK, we'll quickly go back to Damien. He just wants to make a comment or a quick question. Go ahead.
I understand that, and it's very easy for this conversation about negative gearing and housing price to turn to an investment conversation. But I'm asking about the fact that at the moment, the average household in Sydney costs 12 to 14 times annual income for people, which has never been that high. I don't think when you bought your house, it was a factor of 12 to 14 times your annual income. But for my generation, that's what it costs. And when I'm thinking about investment, we can't afford to buy our first home.
Damien, I didn't give my answer very well then, and thank you for bringing me back to the key point. My party is giving first home buyers a chance to compete on a more level playing field so you can get your home. I actually back your dream. The dream of Australia is not, as Mr Turnbull says, the right to claim a tax deduction. The dream of Australia is to be able to make sure that your kids grow up and can buy their first home, especially people like you. You started your first job when you're 14 and 9 months. You've educated yourself. You've done everything that's expected of you. It is not too unreasonable to think that in Melbourne and Sydney, you have to be priced out of the market and face unfair competition.
How can he do that unless prices come down?
Well, the fact of the matter is that prices, if they grow more slowly, give you a better chance.
OK. OK, I think that's the answer you're going to get. This is Q&A live from Western Sydney. Tonight, Opposition Leader Bill Shorten is facing the questions. Our next question comes from Doug Delaney.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Welcome to Penrith, Bill. I'll be the first person in here for you. Mate, just I know everyone's talking about all other issues and that, and I just want to give you a bit of a wrap to an organisation called the Penrith Aboriginal Health Service. They're creating 60 to 120 school-based traineeships for Aboriginal kids in this area, which is a first through a process called ACDC, not the band, Aboriginal Culture Duty Care. It's pretty...
Doug, I'm going to have to bring you to your question,
Yeah,
my
the question's coming now. Thanks, mate. I just want to ask you, what's your opinion about the University of New South Wales saying that in their curriculum that this land was invaded by the British in 1788? What's your opinion about that?
I reckon that if you're... If anyone says that Aboriginal people weren't dispossessed from their land by the British settlement, they're telling lies. Would you describe this, that's the question, as an invasion? If I was Aboriginal, I wouldn't exactly call it a welcome, would you?
Yeah, I'm asking you what you call it. We'll go back to, first of all, Doug, are you an Aboriginal person?
Yes, mate, yep.
Yeah, OK. So what's the answer you want to hear?
Well, the answer, what I want to hear is that the government is spending heaps of money on the Recognise campaign, and and there's also people talking about a treaty. Unfortunately, I disagree with both because I can't handle when kids were being, brutally, killed back those days. But what I do agree with is that if the Commonwealth look at enacting Section 121 of the Australian Constitution to give Aboriginal people their own statehood, you're giving us everything else that we want, but unfortunately, the next phase that we need is to be governed by ourselves, and the Constitution is for everybody in this country to give us our right to be governed by ourselves. That's what I reckon.
All right. I'm just going to go back to the original question because I want to hear an answer about whether you regard the British coming into this country as an invasion.
If I was an Aboriginal or Indigenous person, yes, I would.
If you were you.
Well, my ancestors came out here as convicts, so I don't feel that the convicts were part of the invading force, if that's any good. Yeah. They didn't have any choice coming here either. But I want to go to the issue. You made a whole power of points there. I'll be quick. I actually think there's been too much argument in this country about the very stuff you're raising. Correct. Aboriginals were dispossessed off their land. This was Aboriginal land. It is, it always will be. Secondly, we've had arguments initially, it was terra nullius, they said no one was here. Well, that's a bit harsh. That's not right. And then we've had arguments about what's the best form of reconciliation. And there's been some people who say it's about practical reconciliation. I think that's right. Then other people say it's about symbolic reconciliation. I think that's right too. Changing the Constitution, having discussions about what a treaty settlement and all that looks like. There's been a false argument going on in Australia about are you a practical person or you're a symbolic person. They're both important. Do I think that there should be a separate Aboriginal state? No. But do I think that we should have our first Australians mentioned in the national birth certificate, the Constitution? Yes. Do I think we need to move beyond just constitutional recognition to talking about what a post-constitutional recognition settlement with Indigenous people looks like? Yes, I do.
Could it look like a treaty?
Yes. So is that something you might move towards in government, a treaty? Well, what I've said, again, I just have a sense, Tony, maybe you think I'm a little harsh on you, there's a little bit of gotcha going on here.
No, it's not gotcha. It's a question based on what you just said. When you said yes, I assumed certain things.
Yeah, but you can. I think you were just surprised to hear me say yes.
I was. That's the point.
So...
I just go quickly...
Hang on, Tony, you asked me 6 questions there.
No, I asked you 1.
6 times. This is a serious issue. And, all sort of good humour aside, I do think that this country is not handling Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people well. I actually do think it's a disgrace. The very opening question by Colin, I think it was, is what are moments in this election where you sort of feel you can go off script? Well, I actually think that calling out racism in this country isn't part of the said election script, but it's true. I actually think it is a disgrace of some mammoth proportions that a young Aboriginal man in this country who's aged 18 is more likely to go to jail than to go to university. I think that's a disgrace. Now, I don't think Australians, if they hear that fact, would disagree with me. I do not like the idea that in parts of Australia, your skin colour is a predictor of whether or not you're going to get a custodial sentence. So I do think the issues that Doug are raising are right, and I do think there needs to be a discussion about should you have a treaty or shouldn't you have a treaty, but what I'm not going to do is give all the answers on one spot at one time. But what I can promise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is it's not an accident that we've prioritised the pre-selection of Linda Burney or prioritised the pre-selection for the Labor Party of Pat Dodson. I think it is important that we have more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in the Parliament of Australia. No more people, making decisions for Aboriginal people. The more that you've got Aboriginal leaders, and the Libs have got Ken Wyatt, that's excellent. There's a range. The parties have tried to work towards it. I've made it a priority in my party as leader.
Okay.
I think that the more empowerment we give for young Aboriginal leaders, for Aboriginal leaders generally to control their own destiny, the better this country will be and the more equal it'll become.
Thank you very much, Doug. We've got to move on. Our next question is from Amanda Foxon-Hill.
Scientific reports show the Great Barrier Reef to be hardest hit up in the pristine north, an area that's sheltered from runoff from agriculture and heavy industry. Being as this bleaching and degradation is almost entirely from global warming, how can any government that supports the ongoing expansion of coal and coal seam gas mining see the money they have pledged to save the reef as a good investment?
Shame Malcolm Turnbull's not here to hear you ask that question. In terms of what Labor's said, I want to talk a bit about the reef, then go to the broader question, which for you is about climate change and coal. So thank you, Amanda, for the question. Labor has pledged $500 million over the next 5 years to help save the reef. And the reason why that's important isn't just the environmental benefit of the reef and the unique nature of the largest organism in the world. It's also that good environments generate good jobs. 70,000 people make a living from the reef. It generates $6 billion worth of turnover for the Australian economy. And the reason why I say that is people think that dealing with climate change is somehow a debate between environmentalists and business. It's not. Climate change is an opportunity as well as a threat. Not dealing with climate change will have an impact on the bottom line of family budgets. Not dealing with climate change will have an impact on future generations who will have to do more to fix it up. So when we talk about the reef and when we talk about climate change, they are inextricably linked. It is a joke that on one hand, my opponents out there on the reef, that's good, pledging money, that's good, but if you've got climate change policies which do nothing about climate change, it's just a $1 billion Band-Aid of neglect.
Okay, just go back one step though. You mentioned the figure $1 billion, your figure $500 million.
Yeah.
Will you match their figure?
No, we don't need to because we've actually got real policies on climate change which deal with the real issue.
Okay, so I mean, we could put in crude political terms, they've outbid you on the reef.
Oh, they haven't outbid us on climate change, man. We're not
on
even
the reef.
Yes, but that's the mistake which some in the media make. The reef is not disconnected to climate change.
Okay, all right. Now we go back to the other half of that question you
Coal.
promised to answer, which was about the coal. And of course, there are huge mines up in Queensland, the Carmichael mine, for example. Should it go ahead?
A Labor government isn't going to ban coal mining in this country. You know, we're not going to. Coal is going to be part of our energy mix for the foreseeable future. But with the Adani mine, a government I form won't spend $1 of taxpayer money on the mine. It has to stand up under its own commercial propositions and its own scientific and environmental propositions. Where we will spend proactively our resources is incentivising the renewable energy industry. We are the sunniest continent in the world, we're the windiest continent in the world, and yet what's happened in the last 2.5 years under the current Liberal government is we've shed nearly 3,000 renewable energy jobs. For the record, the rest of the world's added on 2 million renewable energy jobs. You know, I understand Australia can't always be first at something, but when we're last at something, that is really frustrating.
Okay, you're watching Bill Shorten on Q&A live from Western Sydney. Our next question comes from Susan Day.
We want to work close to home, Mr Shorten. Why can't the federal government create a fund to build a national bus network infrastructure? Providing fast, efficient alternatives like express bus services is the only way we can get people out of cars. I ask you to imagine a T-way style network from Penrith to Parramatta straight down the motorway. This is what we need here instead of more motorways.
Okay, it's a different take on the public transport versus cars debate, but this is one about buses.
Susan, this is my, I don't know, if you call this a Q&A, a town hall session, this is about my 35th in the last 8 months. At each one of them, you always get an idea which you think, oh, that's pretty good, that's pretty interesting. So I'm not going to make up some answer to you. I'd like to take that on board. I'd like to talk to you afterwards or in the next couple of days with Emma Hazar, our candidate, and Lindsay. I get that people need options for transport. And for me, there's been this almost false debate. You're either for the roads or you're for the rail. You know, like, I like both of them. We have got money for nation-building infrastructure projects in public transport. But I'm interested to explore with you.
Are we going to see more of those rolled out in the coming weeks? Not a lot of time till the election.
Yeah, we've said that we'll build tram lines in Adelaide. We've already said we'd help co-sponsor with the state government better public transport in Perth. We've said we'll build Brisbane Cross River Rail. We'll talk to the Victorian government about Melbourne Metro. We see public transport as urban public transport systems as being a legitimate source of activity for federal governments to help with infrastructure funding. We've proposed setting up a concrete bank which would loan money for projects approved by Infrastructure Australia, an independent body who reviews is the deal a good deal or a bad deal, do the numbers stack up, is it good for the economy and the community. But your particular bus proposal, to return to you, Susan, I'm happy to chat to you in the next couple of days. You know, I don't know enough about the bus services between Penrith and Parramatta, but you know, this is the function of meetings like this. We all want to make statements to each other, but you also want to exchange information. So
Okay.
I'd be happy to follow that up if
Thank
that's all
you.
right with
Let's go to our next question. It's from Patricia McMillan.
The current age pension for a married couple is $658.70 per week. It is widely recognised that those on the minimum wage, currently $656.90, struggle to make ends meet. If Labor win this election, can we expect an increase in age pensions?
Simple question.
Yeah, good on you. We will support increases to the pension based on the indexation formula which currently exists.
What if people are struggling to survive?
Sorry.
No, but just,
Sorry, one thing we did
Okay,
do
go ahead.
is that the Abbott government, having promised there'd be no cuts to pensions, wanted to introduce a lower indexation rate. We successfully saw that off. Probably the best thing I can tell you about what we'll do for people on fixed incomes is we're going to preserve and protect your healthcare system. We won't let them privatise the payment system in Medicare. We've agreed to scrap the price hike for prescription drugs, and we'll also make sure that we'll provide regular increases to GPs so you can keep getting bulk billing if that's what you need. That doesn't go to your specific pension, but healthcare costs as you get older are one of the sort of big ingredients, and when you're on a fixed income, you have far less flexibility to cope if there's changes in those matters.
Let's go back to Patricia. Are you happy to hear that there are other ways to compensate people on pensions? That seems to be what's being said.
Yes, but I don't think it's nearly enough because when people retire, they have extra medical expenses. They still have all their existing expenses like insurance, their maintenance on their home, and it's impossible to live on such a small amount.
Okay, that is the bottom line. There are people who are saying it's impossible to live on the pension as it is. And the question was, will you increase it beyond indexation?
We have no plans to increase it beyond indexation. What I can say to you is I'm very conscious of how people on fixed incomes construct their finances. It's by about day 11 or 12 of a fortnightly payment, you're pretty conscious of how much you have. If the washing machine breaks down or the tyres need replacing, or all of a sudden your bill seems higher than you're expecting, these are matters of real significance. What I can promise you is when it comes to your healthcare system, we will keep the downward pressure on the prices. When it comes to those scans and tests you may need, you hope you don't, but you may need, we've got policies to keep downward pressure on that. So our focus is downward pressure on the healthcare system, keep it universal and keep it affordable.
Okay, we've got another question on the healthcare system, on the hospitals. In fact, it's from Ronald Chin. Go ahead.
G'day, hi. My name is Ron Chin. I'm an associate professor in head and neck cancer surgery at Nepean Hospital. I'm very proud to provide a service to my area. Despite the fact that Nepean Hospital is amongst the most efficient hospitals in New South Wales, the median wait time for a person having elective surgery is well over 300 days. Yeah. This is more than double the average wait time in our state at 150 days. This is very objective evidence of a funding shortfall. Will you work with us in a constructive and collaborative manner to create a funding model which more evenly distributes and more justly distributes our valuable health resources so that we can look after our patients?
Thanks, Glenn. Yes, we announced yes, we will. And first of all, I should just thank you and all the staff at Nepean Hospital. So that's the first thing I should just say. Nepean Hospital, I'm conscious, I think, my research has told me it was built just after the Second World War in the 50s. It provides it's providing a lot of service and it hasn't got the resources it needs. And people have made me aware of the waiting list issue, including my local candidate, Emma Hazar. We announced on Sunday at Townsville Hospital our national hospitals package. We have pledged to restore the agreement that was previously struck that the federal government will pay 50% of the efficient price of funding for hospitals. What that means is that we pay 50% of the state's costs in terms of the hospitals. What we've also said is that our priorities in return for this extra funding is the greater priority and resource too, not just asking but providing money, to reduce elective surgery waiting lists and to reduce waiting times in emergency departments. And by the way, not only do the answer is yes, we are providing extra funding. We'll work with the states in the hospital administration. We're providing more funding than the other guys because we think this is a priority.
Isn't it the case, though, that you've actually had to cut back on your original promise for funding to public hospitals?
Oh, there's no way anyone currently breathing in this world could replace every dollar the Liberals have taken out. But what we will do... But
the previous promises made by Labor governments, you had to cut back on those.
No, that's not right, mate. No, 50% efficient funding is what we're doing. But what we are doing is pledging resources for elective surgery waiting lists. But the final point, just to perhaps, Ron, give you a bit more to take back to your colleagues and staff, is I get that there's an issue there with capital works as well. Your hospital could do with some capital infrastructure too, and that's one of the big issues which we're currently working on. I know Emma Hazar has been at pains to educate me that it's not just waiting lists at Nepean. The staff are doing a great job, but it'd be good if you had some of the physical infrastructure which was 21st century to match your 21st century.
In terms of how to pay it, got a Twitter question on this. Just come in. Why is the Medicare levy not being increased?
Well, at this stage, we don't think the case is made out to do it. We're making other choices.
300-day waiting list, not a good case?
No, but we're already working on that by what I just said.
Okay.
No, but the other thing here is that we think...
So no plans to increase the Medicare levy, just to make that clear?
It's not on our radar, no. I'm not saying people haven't put it up there and various states have, but the way we fund this country is important and the way we pay for our promise is important. That's why we rejected the 15% GST, which the government looked at seriously for 6 months. It's why we rejected Malcolm Turnbull's idea to give the power to states to levy state income taxes. It's why we reject their $50 billion giveaway to very large companies. Because we think that the way you make decisions in this country is that you don't reward just the top end of town, or you don't necessarily make every person pay more for goods and services or pay more income tax. We've been able, through hard work, by making multinationals pay their fair share, by looking at negative gearing and capital gains discount concession reform, by not reducing the rates paid by high net worth individuals, by not going ahead with the corporate tax cut, we've made choices. And our choice is that we will find scarce resources for hospitals, for helping out pensioners with their healthcare costs, for properly funding our schools. But we also think that these investments help drive a sustainable economic story.
Okay. All right. Let's move on. Our next question is from Mark McGyver.
Thanks, Tony. Bill,
Mark.
In his 1972 campaign launch, Gough Whitlam said, "The Australian Labor Party will build into the administration of the affairs of this nation machinery that will prevent any government, Labor or Liberal, from ever again cloaking your affairs under excessive and needless secrecy. Labor will trust the people." Bill, what's your position on trusting the people? Will you repeal those provisions of the border protection legislation and other legislation that have the potential to keep the truth from our citizens?
Okay, now, I was going to say, keep these answers short. We're going to get a few questions. We're running out of time.
Okay, I'll try and keep them as short as I can.
Yeah.
We are up for looking at whistleblower reform. We think that whistleblowers perform an important function in our society. So we are up for whistleblower reform, full stop.
Okay, precisely the secrecy provisions on the border protection legislation, would you wind them back or make significant changes to them as the questioner is asking?
Well, I'm not going to go for each section of the Border Protection Act because I don't know each subsection of the Act, but...
You know the section where ministers would come out and border officials would come out on a regular basis and say we can't comment because of on-water matters. I'm sure that's what he's referring to.
Well, I actually thought in part what you're referring to is people...
Okay, but he's nodding now, so I think we're on the right track.
Okay. Okay, well, I thought you were referring to whistleblower protection in terms of Manus and Nauru, and I don't think there's any...
Okay, we'll go back to him if you like.
Sorry, Tone.
Sorry,
I didn't mean to interrupt your question with an answer.
No, I'm interrupting you to actually hear what the questioner wanted to hear. Go ahead. It's your question, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I might make it a bit clearer for you.
Thanks.
We'd like to know what's going on.
Yeah, well, you should.
Whether it be on Manus Island, Christmas Island, or anywhere else, our government seeks to take action on people.
The short answer is, if I was Prime Minister, it would have to be an amazing set of circumstances where we're not prepared to tell you what's going on. I can't imagine the set of circumstances that would be. I haven't got all the security agencies in front of me, but as a general rule, this nation operates best if you treat people as smart and intelligent and tell them what's going on, full stop. I find it's the easiest way to get consensus on tough issues. If you treat people like mushrooms and keep them in the dark, well, you can't be surprised if people don't back in government policies.
So you'd allow journalists, independent observers onto Nauru and Manus or any offshore detention centre?
Yeah.
Okay.
And by the way, when I say that, I do that on the basis that I don't want to see the people smugglers back in business before, the Libs run their attack ads. They try and run an argument somehow that if you had transparency of arrangements in these facilities, that somehow it undermines our efforts to stop the people smugglers. No, it doesn't. I actually think this nation, ever since Pauline Hanson reared her head, has been having to battle with some of these issues. I also think that when it comes to defeating the people smugglers, a Labor government will not be any different to the Libs in terms of our determination to stop the people smugglers, full stop. And we're not going to give them any encouragement in this election to think anything else. But when it comes to transparency in the way that people directly or indirectly in Australia's care are treated, I do not see why that has to be a secret.
Okay, let's move on. I've got a question from Belinda Hill. Thank you.
I run a family building business. I have done for 8 years, and one of the things I support the most is more women in construction. But most of the women I speak to are intimidated by the behaviour of the CFMEU, the violence, the protests, and the intimidation that we see on TV. My question is, why won't you support the ABCC?
Thanks, Belinda. First of all, there is never any set of circumstances. Doesn't matter if you're a union rep or a banker or a TV person or a politician. There is never any acceptable harassment or abuse of women ever allowed. So I agree with you on that. And wherever that occurs, whoever's doing it, it's illegal and it's wrong. In terms of how you regulate the conduct of the Building Construction Union, there are already regulators and there are already mechanisms to chase this up. The truth of the matter is that Mr Turnbull's called this whole election about the ABCC, but he hasn't said a lot about it. Now, maybe he's got some ads he'll run out or whatever. The point about it is, though, in our building sector, we need to make sure that there is respect for the law. We need to make sure that agreements are kept and that people go to work in a safe environment. What I don't accept is his particular solution to it. We've also proposed solutions, but there can be no doubt, Belinda, that your core value that you're expressing is one I agree with.
Okay, we're running out of time. I'd like to come back to that question, but we haven't got time to do that. We've got some other important questions to get to. The next question comes from Mark Moscovich.
Mr Shorten, the Badgerys Creek Airport is extremely unpopular across Western Sydney. Are you prepared to have Labor lose the West on the basis of your support for the airport?
I support Badgerys Creek Airport. I think it'll generate the jobs. But we've also respected that there are views in the community about this airport. So in saying that, my Western Suburbs MPs have been very active in terms of encouraging the development of our no-fly policy over the future pathways where the airport will be between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. So we are up for having the proper conversations with the community and the various representative groups who are worried about the impact of this. We also want to make sure that this airport, if it goes ahead, has public transport built into it from the start. We also want to make sure that the jobs are genuinely going to be going to people in the western suburbs of Sydney first.
Okay, we're going to go back to our questioner and just hear his reaction to your response.
Yeah, I guess just on from what you've said, and you mentioned jobs, I would ask how many jobs for piano teachers, for veterinarians, for hairdressers? Not everybody in Western Sydney works in the construction or airline industry.
No, you're right, and that's why you've got to have a diverse economy. I'm not sitting here tonight and saying to you that I think Badgerys Creek Airport solves every challenge in the West. If we want to have jobs for veterinarians and for piano teachers and those other occupations, our plan is to make sure that those kids who've got those passions can afford to go to university and in the West. If you want to make sure that we've got a diverse economy, that's why we also have not just infrastructure being physical infrastructure, but we have the NBN. Labor understands that this country goes ahead by not just relying on heavy industry alone. So we do have a view about the centrality of education to developing good quality jobs and workforce, to making sure that we are supporting small business, to making sure that we do have quality nation-building infrastructure, which is not just planes and or airports and roads and rail, but it's NBN. We've got a view also about renewable energy. I think there's a lot of renewable energy jobs and manufacturing jobs, advanced manufacturing jobs, which can be created here in the West if we've got the right policies. I just want the chance to make sure that those occupations you're talking about and everyone else in the western suburbs of Sydney, there's 2 million people live in the West here. If it was its own city, the big cities of the West, I know it's more than just one, just Penrith, it would be the third largest city in Australia. It's not an accident I'm having my campaign launch here on Sunday, because I get that Western Sydney speaks for a lot of the stories of Australia.
Okay, we've still got a couple of questions to get through. Next one is from Sinead Wynne.
Hello. The full-time gender pay gap is currently 17.3% or $277.70 per week. This is one of the biggest wage gaps in the Western world currently. As a female high school student just beginning working age, I find it absolutely unacceptable that I will be paid less for doing the same work as an equally as competent or a less competent male in the same situation as me. My question is, if a Shorten Labor government is elected, what will they do to right this fundamental wrong?
Thank you, Sinead. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bill
Sinead.
Shorten.
Thanks, Sinead. There is no doubt in my mind that feminised occupations where the workforce is, significantly female, are at a wage disadvantage compared to men. So the first thing is, you're right about the wage gap. How we would tackle it, and that isn't right that it occurs, how we would tackle it, we need to tackle it at every level. At the very top level, the Labor Party that I'm in, we've proposed that 50% of our MPs will be women by 2025. We're already north of 40%, but I want women role models. The second thing is, we're going to propose that Commonwealth boards, these are government boards, that in the first term of a Labor government, if we're elected, we want half these positions going to women. Now, some people say, oh, that's not right, you should just be, do it on merit. I actually think that the merit argument tends to be run by some people who just want everyone to look like them. The truth of the matter is that half of our society is easily half of the ability and merit of this country. So that's why we're doing the leadership stuff. When it comes to an extreme example of what contributes to unfairness and therefore the gender gap, you've got to look at this issue which doesn't get spoken about enough. It's called domestic violence, the violence against women at home. If women can't be safe at home, then this country's always going to have a gender pay gap. Now, then you look at the actual issues in particular occupations. It was a previous Labor government who created the ability for unions or groups to be able to run an argument saying that our occupation, because it's predominantly feminised, receives lower wages for people with comparable skills in non-feminised industries, and that was the community services industry. So that we made the law change so that cases could be run with the independent umpire. So I think that one of the next battlefields there will be childcare workers. Because childcare workers and early year educators are, I think, not as well paid proportionately as a comparable occupation would be, which was predominantly male-dominated. So wherever you look at it, be it in our own actions as a political party and encouraging women to positions of power, to dealing with the toughest of issues, which is violence against women, to dealing with how you make the evidence and make the logical case, The gender pay gap is a priority for us. It's one of the reasons, for instance, why we're supporting low-paid workers, that's workers who earn less than $37,000 a year, get better superannuation by not asking them to pay tax on their modest contributions they receive. How that helps the pay gap is 2/3 of these people, or 60% at least, are women, because women receive less pay. So from paid parental leave right through to superannuation, through to leadership, through to violence against women, my party sees that the equal treatment of women is actually a mainstream political issue in this election. And by the way, if this country did nothing else in the next 15 years to make sure that women are treated equally, we'd have it made. We'd be the richest country in the world.
We've got time for one last question. This one is from Judy Lynch, subject not often talked about in this campaign.
During the Second World War, Winston Churchill was asked to justify his government's increase in arts funding at the expense of the war effort. It's reported that Churchill replied, "Then what are we fighting for?" Churchill believed the robust, well-funded artistic and cultural life was at the core of a civilised society. Mr Shorten, can you tell me where you and the Labor Party stand regarding funding for the arts?
Remind you, by the way, we're here at the Joan Sutherland Performing Arts Centre. A very appropriate way to end. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy, for raising an issue which doesn't get a lot of ventilation in this election. And I think, to refer back to that first answer I gave to Colin, one of the things I've enjoyed about this longer election, sorry, I'm enjoying it, I didn't pick the length of it, is the chance to talk about issues which don't always get out there in the national stage. And I actually think I said in my opening, arts was one of them. So we've announced our arts policy. You know, in a campaign, you take up a day of the campaign on an issue because you think it's important. We think the arts are important. We think the arts talk to our hinterland as a nation, to who we are and our identity as Australians. So specifically, in no particular order, we've pledged $5.4 million, which is not a lot, but it's still quite a bit, for live music, because we think live music speaks to the stories of who we are, and I want Australian artists on the global stage. We've actually said, and I don't say this to curry any favour, but we would fund over the next 4 years not all of the cuts the Liberals have made to the ABC. We are promising $60 million for drama for the ABC and another $20 million, by the way, to allow 500 hours of women in sport to be covered on the ABC. That doesn't happen enough.
Okay, I'll just quickly...
But there's even more. I'm sorry, I'm trying to go for our arts policy as quick as we can. But we're also proposing to support the teaching of arts in school. And dare I say it, the Gonski reforms, which we're backing, will allow more schools to be able to offer more kids the opportunity to fall in love with the creative and performing arts. I'm very committed to it, and we're backing it up with our time, priority and energy. Oh, and of course, how could I forget? We're going to stop the Liberal government ministers being in charge of arts funding. We're going to give the money back to the Australia Council and take the politics out of the arts.
Okay, that is all we have time for tonight. We're over time. Please thank our special guest, Bill Shorten, and our thanks too to the Joan Sutherland Performing Arts Centre and this great audience. Please give yourselves a quick round of applause.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Next week, Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull will join Q&A in Brisbane to answer your questions, just as the opposition leader did tonight. Malcolm Turnbull came to the top job last September, promising clear economic leadership and a revitalised government. He was welcomed by a wave of popularity that seemed to promise a landslide of voters, but he's now facing a tight election. Next week, for the first time since he became Prime Minister, he'll be facing your questions on Q&A. Until then, good night.